Are you ready to get your health back but feel overwhelmed by the endless healthcare options? We believe God has called each of us to a specific assignment, and we want to make sure your body, mind, and heart are up for the task. It's time to simplify the process of healing. At Cornerstone Integrative Healing, we offer simple, effective, easy ways to prioritize your health and gain understanding. No prescription pad needed. I'm Kari, a pharmacist turned integrative health practitioner. I'm so excited to have these conversations around topics with my friend, Jenn.
Hi there, I'm Jenn, and together with our team at Cornerstone Integrative Healing, we offer an alternative to traditional healthcare, combining our expertise and experience in the medical field with our knowledge and faith to break the cycles of guessing what's wrong. We know the road to healing, feeling good again, can be overwhelming. You can expect honest conversations around the ups and downs of healing. The truth is, there are so many layers to healing. Because we've taken the time to learn where true healing comes from, we've learned how to help other women discover a different way of caring for themselves. Join us every week for new episodes as we discuss topics that are personal and pertinent to your healing journey.
Welcome, everybody, back to the Cornerstone Integrative Healing Podcast. Kari and Jenn here. And we have a special guest back with us, Marinna. We're going to be diving into what we're calling part 2 of our chat about infertility. If you are just tuning in for the first time, welcome. You might want to go back and listen to kind of the part 1 to this, which is more so maybe how to approach a better way to approach fertility and just talking around that topic. I know it can be a really sensitive one for people. So that one's a really good one to go back and listen to if you haven't already. But we wanted to do a part 2 because we didn't talk a whole lot about the physical things that can go into fertility in general and just some of the maybe overlooked root causes of just your body preparing to make a new life. So we wanted to dive into that in this episode. So, where do we want to start, gals?
Well, I think I just want to go back to something that Marinna said in the last podcast, which was dead on. And that is infertility is a symptom. It's not a diagnosis unless there is scarred tubes or maybe antibodies to sperm, something like that, right? But even antibodies really to sperm is, in my opinion, still not a diagnosis in the sense that there's something deeper, right? So, she was right on in saying that, right, it's an invitation to look deeper into our health because we were made to reproduce, really. And when we're not, there is usually a good explanation. Now, we'll talk a little bit about male infertility here, but there is obviously two partners in this rodeo, and so we're talking about both of them. About 75% of the time in unexplained infertility, it can be the male issue with a sperm parameter. So we do want to pay attention to that because that's important. And, I want to talk about a few of the physical causes to explore. Again, you've heard some of these because they are rooted in foundationally healing any condition, right? And in general. And those are heavy metals, which show up more than we think. And sometimes if there are heavy metals, especially in the semen, the female can begin to produce antibodies to the semen. So that's something that we definitely want to look into for both parties, but really for male infertility too. And then chemicals. This is a huge one. When I say huge, I mean massive. We are surrounded by xenoestrogens, or things that mimic estrogen, and things that can kill sperm. In our household products, on our cleaning products, we're spraying our yards with them. We're eating them. So this is the time, if you're on a fertility journey, to really look at every aspect of what you come in contact with, whether in the home or outside the home. I mean, things that we don't even think of, like styrofoam. When we get to go food, they're putting hot food in styrofoam. So chemicals are pervasive and definitely something that is a huge topic for infertility. Infection, obviously. Again, we talk a lot about infection. I think we have in this podcast before. But, for women, if there are gynecological infections, chlamydia being the most common leading to infertility, those need to be treated and sometime with mainstream like antibiotics. So those are definitely something to think about. Medical drugs. Marinna, do you wanna jump in here?
Yeah, sure. Um, going through conventional fertility treatments, you start off with Clomid or letrozole, which is usually used for artificial insemination. So it causes you to produces ovulation. I ovulated on my own, but they use this to make a better follicle, so to say. And sometimes you get 2 or 3 of them. So they assume like your chances are increased because you're going to have more than one follicle that's matured enough. So those are usually the 2 that they start with. But once you get into IVF, obviously the medication usage goes way up. And I'm not just talking about, the injectables that are needed to stimulate the eggs and all those, that we hear about. I'm talking about the supplemental medications that I was taking while going through these cycles. A lot of them were to suppress my immune system because they assumed that that's what was causing implantation failures. I was on metformin, prednisone, antibiotics, even though I didn't have infections. That's just a general, blanket thing that they put both the male and the female on when going through IVF, kind of like a catch-all. I was on blood thinners because I had endometriosis. I was on aspirin, Lovenox. I mean, the list really kind of went on. And that had nothing to do with all the injectables on top of that. So when I started thinking to myself, I am taking 11 plus medications and all the supplements to have a baby. This just does not seem right. Because with those medications come side effects, nutrient deficiencies, especially metformin, prednisone, long-term, Lovenox. And you're not told any of this. So I think it's really important for women to understand the full effects of these things. It probably, honestly, in my gut, and what I really learned from God is these medications probably have set me back. They probably made a lot of things escalated or worse. And I'm not saying that's for everybody, but I think in my own personal journey, it definitely led to a longer road than needed. So it's definitely something to be aware of. Like, you have to ask yourself, why am I needing all of these meds to conceive and to carry a child? It just didn't seem right. It didn't sit right in my gut or in my heart.
Yeah. I mean, 11 medications, that's not including the injectables. I mean, that seems to me like, yeah, that's crazy. And look, I just want to interject something here. I know some women are desperate to conceive, and I don't want to, put that aside. That for those women and their journeys, it's heart wrenching, and they really will do anything. And so, if you're in that situation, I don't want you to feel like it's a judgment or, we're condemning that at all. We're just for those women that are really looking to, get in sync, and really try to get the body healthy and, your partner healthy as well to see if you can do it naturally. That's really what we're trying to point out, ways and things that you can do that you might not have thought of or even consider, that might affect fertility. So With that said, those were medical drugs. There's also social drugs, caffeine actually being the worst, which a lot of people don't even think about. It's highly inflammatory, contributing to endometriosis, especially if you have endometriosis. It adversely affects estrogen balance, pushing you more toward the estrogen dominance. It's been linked to miscarriage. So for, those women, who use high amounts of caffeine and they're on a fertility journey, this is definitely something to consider. Tobacco, for obvious reasons, the contaminants, the pesticides, there's lots of things to tobacco, but probably even more common now is alcohol. So I saw a study that even one drink during ovulation causes a 50% reduction in implantation, which to me was crazy. I mean, that's mind-blowing. But also you have to remember that alcohol is a really refined carbohydrate. And so it's decreasing things, anything that helps with blood sugar, zinc, chromium, B vitamins. These are all being used as an increased rate if you are drinking, not to mention the toxic side effects of course, having to, detox the alcohol. And then, of course, recreational drugs of all kinds. So these are everyday things that we're doing that we might not think really impact fertility, but they impact both partners, and it's definitely something you can consider. What we call gonadotoxins, so your gonads are your either ovaries or testes, and these are toxins that I talked about in the beginning that relate to everyday use. So chemicals in the home, outside the home, they were spraying, they were eating, that we're breathing in, those sorts of things. And then something we probably don't think about is radiation. Ionizing radiation, so even like taking a commercial flight over 4 hours in a commercial flight is equal to a chest X-ray. And there's some studies that showed even one X-ray can affect fertility up to 3 years after that. So that's definitely something to consider. And then more likely what you're exposed to is what's called the non-ionizing radiation, which is our mobile phones, the screens, the computer monitors, microwaves, TVs, those sorts of things. And I would say the best thing that you can do for those are mushrooms, quality mushrooms to prevent some of the damaging effects of that non-ionizing radiation. So those are some of the physical root causes that we talk about in infertility. There's also things, obviously, that we can get into that are genetic factors or just, genetic snippets. Most familiar with are the MTHFR, methylation issues. That's definitely something to be considered. But then obviously, what we've talked about before, obviously on this podcast, or even really just the gynecological conditions, endometriosis, PCOS. Now, remember, those are usually precipitated by some of these other stressors that we just mentioned, right? So endometriosis, which is often actually sometimes missed, but because it can be outside the uterus, right? There'll be endometrial tissue outside the uterus, on the ovaries, or surrounding glands. This can be an issue. Some of the key signs are painful intercourse, GI symptoms, because they do, just the close proximity. There could be endometrial tissue close to those bowels, and then really painful periods can definitely be something. This will obviously affect the implantation and hormone signaling because you're in a state of estrogen dominance with endometriosis. So estrogen, sometimes testosterone are both high, which of course are going to, affect definitely fertility issues. And then polycystic ovarian.
More about endometriosis, just because everybody might not be familiar with it, or
yeah, sure.
Marinna, do you want to talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah. So they say, oh, I was diagnosed with endometriosis. That's the cause. That's the root cause. But I don't think of endometriosis as a root cause. I think it's an autoimmune. I truly believe it's a type of autoimmune condition. And they're just finally starting to realize that it is more of an autoimmune condition than a reproductive issue. But there's always something that leads to tissue growing outside of the uterus, and in my understanding of things. You're not born that way. You could definitely have genetic components that can lead you to maybe have more at risk of it growing that way. I never had it in my family that I know of. So that's what I want to, emphasize is, yes, you have endometriosis, but why? Is it the chemicals? Is it the toxins? Is it chronic infection? Is it trauma from your past? Is it mineral deficiencies, which is probably a big one? Is it parasites? There's all these things that can contribute to the immune system being kind of out of whack, because that's essentially what it is. So a lot of women with endometriosis, because they fail so many cycles in IVF, they eventually get booted to a reproductive immunologist. So it's someone that studies immunology, and they run so many different lab markers. And lo and behold, you'll see that your natural killer cells are high, your T cells are off, your CD4 counts are way off the roof. So it's your immune system is causing this. So what is triggering your immune system to cause this overgrowth? So that's when I really started to dig in and understand, well, why do I have endometriosis in the first place? And so that's just something I wanted to stress, because I had what's called silent endometriosis. So I didn't have typical symptoms. Looking back, I'm like, oh, that could have been a sign. But that's also something that people without endo experience. So it was very hard for me to determine that that's what it was. It was a hunch my fertility doctor had, and he was correct. But, going forward, how they treat that is with IVF. It's not treating the endometriosis. So once you have the endometriosis scarring tissue removed, it does grow back if you're not addressing the root causes that causes it to flare in the first place. So they say, 10% of it will grow back each year after your surgery. So that is definitely something I just want people to understand, is it will come back, and if we're not digging deeper.
Yeah. Just it being an inflammatory issue and more of an autoimmune. I mean, that definitely changes, hopefully, a viewpoint of it, because I think a lot of times it's just another diagnosis that we're just like, oh, I have endometriosis. And so we accept it and just, take a med, or just, I don't know. Right. It's just, I feel like I do think that sometimes it is helpful to obviously understand what's going on and from that standpoint have a diagnosis. But I think far too often we just take that as, oh, that's just the way I was born, or, oh, that's just genetic. So I'm just going to accept it and, not really ask why, I guess. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think we should always ask why.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that the exogenous hormone exposure is one of the etiologies that has been linked to endometriosis. So that means dioxins, which are in tampons, you're directly inserting those into the cervix, pesticides, which we're surrounded with, and then hormones in the food. So this is something, while there is an immune relation, remember that the exogenous hormones can be very, very pervasive, and somewhat of a major factor in endometriosis.
And before we kind of move on to, I think we're going to talk about PCOS a little bit, but I know you keep mentioning toxins, which they play a huge role in this and other things. I think we've almost gotten, I don't know what the word is, over, like, I mean, you hear about non-toxic, right? And sometimes it just feels like so much, like, how are we going to avoid all these toxins? Like, we literally can't. And so then we just be like, well, if we can't avoid all of them, then we're just going to not worry about it. It's got to be somewhere in between, because these things really do matter. And I think sometimes it just seems so overwhelming that we just forget about it. And they're like, well, I'm just going to live my life and hope for the best. So we're not trying to evoke fear here, but we're also saying it really does matter. So let's try to be good stewards of like the things that we can control. So like what we bring in our home, or maybe like Jenn said, tampons are a big thing, right? If you're using them every month, then you're inserting them, and they do have toxins. Like that is one area that we can control, like bioorganic, pads or tampons or things like that. That's a pretty easy.
Or a female cup.
Or a cup. Like there's a lot of other different options. And
Right.
I think sometimes it's just, I don't know. There's just this whole thing in the holistic space where I get it's kind of been, we've heard about it a lot, and some people have really taken it to the extreme, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like those things really do matter. And I think a lot of brands are catching on to this is what the consumer wants. So hopefully there'll be a lot more options that are, free of these things. And that should be the norm, right?
Right.
So
Right.
that's going to become more of the norm. But I just wanted to mention that because I think it can be really overwhelming, like all of these things that we need to do. I know both of you probably felt that before too.
Yeah, for sure. And again, start with the dirty dozen list. We've talked about that, right? Buy those top 12 foods organic that are the most sprayed. That's a really good starting point.
That podcast is well below this one. So if you want to, we talked about that in a recent one.
Yeah. So PCOS is something else that can definitely be an issue. It's usually characterized by amenorrhea, which is just the absence of a cycle. Ultimately, the underlying condition is insulin resistance. In fact, mainstream medicine treats it with metformin, which is an insulin sensitizing drug. And so it's really a metabolic problem, right? PCOS. And so, what we need to do is work on that metabolic problem. And I've read so many things about PCOS, but here we come back to light, circadian rhythm, believe it, because we're normalizing cortisol and melatonin, right? And those are huge in insulin resistance, cortisol especially, because it can raise glucose and therefore insulin. So really simple, easy habit is our first morning light. But the PCOS is usually characterized by what they call on ultrasound a string of pearls. So they will actually see the follicles that have become cystic. Usually there's more than one. And again, it's characterized by androgen or like male dominated hair patterns. So hair on the face, usually on the chin for women, around the nipples and going up the belly button. Those are very common PCOS symptoms. And then the absence of course, a cycle. Now, and being overweight is another one, although I've seen rail thin women have PCOS. And then acne. Acne is another big one because testosterone tends to be a little bit higher in PCOS. Not a little bit. It's definitely higher. Testosterone is definitely raised. So, working on the basics we've always talked about, like minerals, managing stress, because managing stress will manage your glucose, which will manage insulin resistance. So those are foundational, right? We absolutely 100% need to work on, but we can use some herbs to help that hormone balance. Of course, if you're not doing the foundations like light and blood sugar and minerals, these are, you could do this all you want, but there are some things that will help to manage high testosterone. And so, we've used them in practice very often, licorice being one of them. Licorice has really good studies with helping to manage high testosterone in combination with other herbs. Yeah, I don't know why I'm totally blanking on the other herbs, but there's another herb that's really an absolute must to help decrease testosterone, and I will think of it. It's in a formula that I use all the time, but I just can't think of it. So, Marinna, anything you wanted to add to PCOS?
PCOS is very difficult because everyone can present so differently.
Yes.
So there's a lot of women that their hair might their hair falling out might be the only sign they have. Or, they might just be gaining weight, not have any acne. It is very, just like endometriosis, it's very like individual. So with both of these conditions, I really, other than the acne, I had very low testosterone, so that didn't make sense. I had very low DHEA. That didn't make sense, but I had cysts all the time. So it's very individualized. So if, it's not necessarily going through and checking these boxes that you have it. It's really just, digging in. And I was told by two different doctors, one saying I did have it, one saying I didn't have it. I mean, at that point, your head is spinning. You want answers, you want a diagnosis, and you're not given a straight answer, because both of these conditions, unfortunately, are very misunderstood and they're not fully understood yet. So we can only do, as we've talked in this podcast, things that we can control in our own environments to help mitigate these things.
Yes. And while we're talking about metabolic health, I want to talk about something that was sort of personal to me, and that's thyroid health. Thyroid health and iodine is super important for estrogen balance, for good cycling, and to help the corpus luteum. I know just from my personal experience, I had several miscarriages before I started taking iodine and supporting my thyroid, before I had a healthy pregnancy. And I've seen this in other women. I'm thinking of one client that we have now that was quote unquote infertile. Even her OBGYN even said her hormones aren't quite there yet. She probably won't conceive and hold a pregnancy, but yet here we are, she's pregnant, she conceived. And praise God, is continuing to hold the pregnancy. So, and one of her biggest, supplementation changes that we made, that I really made, was, giving her a really good dose of iodine. So hyperthyroid, and I want to emphasize that it's usually a subclinical issue, which meaning like you can have these labs, you'll go to your doctor and your doctor's like, yeah, these labs look great, you're good, right? Subclinical means that it doesn't really show up in the labs. There's slight variations, a TSH that's 3, or, a slightly low, free T3, which is your active hormone. High T3, which shows an iodine need. So it can be subclinical. So if your labs, if you were told that your labs look okay, don't stop there. And remember, thyroid and blood sugar support ovulation. They support good progesterone, as well as metabolism. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention the chronic infections. While, we've talked a lot about this: parasites, Epstein-Barr, Lyme, mold, you name it. Because immune dysfunction is a major stressor for the body, causes inflammation. When your body's in this stress response, it's not going to consider conceiving, because it's like, I'm in a state of threat, and so reproducing is not a priority. And so these are definitely things that need to be addressed. Again, they could be subclinical, right? You might not even know, especially for the Lyme. A lot of women don't know. Mold can be very silent. So these are something that definitely, besides the blaring OBGYN, infections that need to be cleared, these are definitely something that needs to be addressed.
I know.
Go ahead.
I know in my own personal case, coming to Cornerstone, you were able to let me know of, just the massive fungal overgrowth that I had. And I think back now, and in my teens, I was on antibiotics for acne. And in my 20s, I was on antibiotics constantly throughout college for various things, because obviously these were all signs that my body was giving me early on that there were imbalances. So I was just constantly being put on antibiotics. So I had significant fungal issues going on. And using a stool test and using some of these more surface level tests, you wouldn't think that. Those were all negative. But it wasn't until, working with Cornerstone that dug a little deeper into my blood work, these things started making sense. So, mold and Lyme, those were both silent conditions that I had going on as well. So that's why I really want to emphasize is your body is giving you a sign of something. So it's really under your control and power to kind of explore that.
And sorry, you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to mention, I can't not mention this when we think about this topic is nervous system. When you think about starting your fertility journey, there's just a lot of emotion that's in that. And we kind of talked about this in part one, but yeah, there's just, I want to reiterate, we don't want these things that we're sharing to be fear invoking. I think sometimes we just get scared of all the things that we don't know. And why is this happening to me? And it's just this whole spiral. And that in itself keeps your body in this just survival state. And again, that's not the state that you want to be in to conceive. So it really drives a lot of these conditions that we're talking about. So yeah, I think the biggest thing that we can do is know who's in control and just ask for discernment when it comes to some of these things. And maybe you do need somebody that can take an objective view of, your signs and symptoms in your labs and just really try to put the pieces together for you. Because if we're constantly trying to figure things out, it's very overwhelming, and we can definitely stay stuck in that fear-based mentality, which is not a healthy situation.
Which is common in infertility,
it's
right?
Very common. So that's why I wanted to mention it. Yeah.
Yeah. And just to, wrap up, I think what people have to understand is this is a process, right? So we've talked about some of these things, like obviously the chemicals, the infections. You should really focus on detoxification and addressing those just in-home exposures, as well as, the infections, social drugs, and then start what we consider preconception healthcare. So it's really a 9-month process, 9 months to a year, because you want to do all the detoxification and then have about 3 to 4 months for preconception healthcare, because that's about the time that you have the development of sperm and the maturation of an egg is about 3 to 4 months. And so to have a healthy sperm and healthy egg, ideally, the 4 months of preconception healthcare before conceiving. And then, after that 4 months of preconception healthcare, start doing things like charting basal body temperature and charting mucus, if you're getting an ovulation spike, those sorts of things. So, and we might have more on that. I don't want to say too much on that, but we might have someone that can help us a little bit more on that coming soon. So,
Marinna, anything you want to leave us with?
I don't think so. My own personal experience with conventional medicine is you don't get something for nothing. So, and that's unfortunate. Taking all of these things, it does come at a cost. And whether it's a physical cost or a mental cost, I didn't want to pass down that physical and emotional stress to whatever child I conceived. So that was how I viewed it. And I know it's different for everyone, but it's just another perspective to carry, another perspective to have. What do you want to pass down? Do you want light and love? So that's where I come from.
Love that. Thanks, Marinna.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, guys. If you have any questions or comments or any ways we can help you with this topic or any other topic, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And yeah, we hope it gave you information that didn't evoke fear. That's not our goal at all, but it is great to think about it as a whole and kind of step back. So hopefully we gave you a better idea of that today. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode.
If this episode has served you in any way, drop a review wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd love it if you'd share any aha moments or takeaways on Instagram and tag us at Cornerstone Integrative Healing.
And if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do so. We want to continue to walk this journey with you. Until next time, friends, know that we're praying for you.